I turned 18 in 2008, and on the day of my birthday, for reasons I won't bore you with, I packed up my things and moved out. For 4 years, I lived in my car, working as a barista from 6 to 2, and as a line cook from 4 to 10. My plan was to work until I had enough money for my own place, and then to either go to college or get a more stable job. Looking back on it now, I don't know how I did it. But by 22, I'd saved up a decent sum of money and began my hunt for a semi-permanent place of residence. I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and though housing prices weren't as bad as they are now, it was still a pricey county. After months of asking around, I was connected with Anders, an elderly man who was leasing a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house in North Hollywood for far below market rate. The catch, because there's always a catch when it comes to affordable housing, was that the house had been terribly maintained. It had been unoccupied for a year and would need some serious TLC before most people could comfortably reside in it. I, however, had been living out of a car for 4 years. As long as the place had running water, it would be an upgrade for me. I moved into the house in fall 2012. Anders gave me a tour before I got settled in. He was a short, joyful old man. Well-meaning, but how do I put this? Maybe not the most focused as the result of his age. At one point during the tour, he showed me the bathroom, then the master bedroom, then the bathroom again, then the master bedroom again. He was about to walk into the bathroom for a 3rd time before I gently guided him down the hall. The house itself was livable, but weathered. Dim lighting from outdated fixtures cast long shadows over peeling wallpaper. The ceiling in many of the rooms was discolored from past leaks. The faucet in the kitchen sink was broken. The bathtub was badly chipped, and a few of the cabinet handles fell off in my hand. It was a run-down place, located in a bars-on-the-window kind of neighborhood. But still, it was my place. I was smiling ear to ear when Anders gave me the keys. "It's a good house with good bones. You take care of it now," he instructed, which I found ironic. Before he left, he paused in the front doorway, drawing a hand to his chin as he looked behind me into the house. I tried to follow his gaze, but I couldn't figure out what he was looking at. "Everything all right?" "Yes. Just that something looks different about that bathroom. Though I can't put my finger on what. Ah, well. It's a good house with good bones. You take care of it now." And with that, he gave me a nod and left me to my unpacking. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed living in a house. I didn't care how run down the place was. Just having an accessible bathroom and a full-size mattress to sleep on made me feel like a king. After I'd spent a few days cleaning the place up, I invited my sister and her fiancé over for dinner. I'm sure it sounds stupid, But my newly acquired ability to host company made me proud. In no time at all, I'd comfortably settled into my new home. That evening, after saying goodbye to my guests, I took a shower. The bathroom lacked a traditional above-the-sink mirror. Instead, it had a wide, full-length mirror mounted on the wall to the left of the vanity. When I exited the shower and stepped up to the glass, raising a hand to wipe away the fog, I noticed something odd. In the condensation, right at my eye level, was the word "hi." I didn't know what to make of it. Somehow, the letters seemed intentional. It was hard to pass off as simply the way the steam had settled. My sister had been in the bathroom just before she left. Maybe she had written the word on the mirror with her fingertip, and the steam had only made the letters visible after my shower. I almost texted her about it, but the message seemed ridiculous when I typed it out. Paranoid, even. I wiped the mirror down and turned in for the night, and soon I forgot about it entirely. The following week, I received a promotion at one of my jobs, and while I was grateful for the additional income, my new position meant longer days. Additionally, I realized that a few of the house repairs were beyond my ability, and so I started outsourcing some work to contractors. It was annoying to only have the house to myself at night, but I didn't have another option with my busy schedule. Things were generally progressing smoothly, though every once in a while, in the middle of the night, I would be awoken by a sound that I couldn't quite place. When I noticed writing on my mirror, I had been living at the house for a month. The second sighting occurred in much the same way as the first. I came back home after work and took a shower. When I pushed back the shower curtain, I looked at the glass and saw, written in the condensation, the words, "Staying long." Now, I could pass 2 letters off as a coincidence, but 2 words? An entire question? That was no coincidence. Someone had been in my bathroom, and recently. I had contractors in and out of my house all the time, so one of them could have written the message. But why? I got dressed and put a hand on the bathroom doorknob, about to go back into my bedroom, when it occurred to me that whoever had written the message might still be around. I slowly cracked open the door, peering down the dark hallway in one direction, then the other. I listened very carefully, but heard nothing. I walked around my house, which didn't take long given its size, and looked for anything out of place. All of my doors were locked, all of my windows were shut, and none of my personal items had been disturbed. If someone had broken into my house, they were long gone by the time I looked around. That second message put me on edge for days. I triple-checked that my windows and doors were locked each night. I looked into every potential hiding spot, of which there were few in my little house. After I came home from work and before I went to sleep, And yet, though I was certain that my house was secure, I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. A month passed without incident. I had almost started to feel at home in my new lodgings again. Until one Friday morning. I awoke just past 3 a.m. I couldn't immediately tell what had woken me. Often, the house settled at night, creaking and groaning in ways that made it sound alive. But in that moment, the house was silent. It was only after I turned my head to the side did I realize that my bedroom door, which I was certain I had shut, was wide open. I stared down the hallway, feeling as though I were gazing into a black hole. The darkness was abyssal. I kept waiting for my eyes to adjust, waiting for them to pick out the familiar shapes of my home. But they never did. I couldn't see a thing. So why did I feel like something could see me? Like there was something in the house with me, just beyond the threshold to my bedroom, watching, waiting. Somehow, I found the courage to raise from my bed and walk toward the door. When I made it to the handle, I grabbed it and slammed the door shut. I didn't investigate further, didn't so much as stick my head out into the hall for a closer look. My bedroom door didn't have a lock. None of the doors, except the bathroom, did. So I dragged my bookcase in front of the door. It was a small bookcase, and an intruder could probably ram the door open anyway if they wanted to. But not before the sound alerted me. When morning came, and I had to leave the house for work, I genuinely considered exiting my house through the window. I was almost late by the time I worked up the nerve myself to look around my house before I left. As always, I found nothing amiss. After work, when I reluctantly returned home for the night, I ate a quick dinner and hopped in the shower. I remember standing in the tub for a long time, mulling over my predicament. I'd heard horror stories about people secretly living in other people's homes. Maybe I had become a victim of a frog without even knowing. But if that was the case, then where the hell were they? There was nowhere to hide in that tiny house. I'd torn that place apart multiple times by then, checking every cabinet and closet. The inside of the house couldn't be accessed from the crawl space, and the air vents were too small for a person to fit in. Suddenly, I heard so tiny that I'd almost missed it entirely. I tore back the shower curtain, gripping the shampoo bottle like I was about to bludgeon an intruder to death with it. As I'd come to expect, there was no one in the room. But there was a new message on the mirror. This one was bold. The easiest to read of any of the messages I'd received so far. It was 3 words long. I see you. Some awful amalgam of fear, confusion, and anger made my stomach churn. Ultimately, the latter emotion rose above the rest. I hastily dried off and threw on some clothes. Then, grabbed my phone from where I'd left it on the bathroom counter. I punched in Anders' number and glared at that damn mirror as I listened to the phone ring again and again. I'd started to think it was too late for him to be awake when he suddenly picked up. He started to ask me how I was faring in my new lodgings before I cut him off. "I need you to tell me if there's some way that a person could be getting into the house. Every night, I check every window and door. I check every cupboard, closet, and cabinet, and still things are amiss. I need you to let me know if there's some entry point that I'm not aware of." Anders didn't seem to entirely understand what I was asking. "What? What's getting in? You let me know if you're having rat troubles. My last tenant before you had rat trouble sometimes." "Yeah, sure, I've got rats. Besides the doors and the windows, how could they be getting in?" "Well, there's the vents, of course. And there was a chimney once. Though, we had it sealed up a good long while ago. And there's also the crawl space, of course. Though I'm sure you've already poked around down there." Though I knew the home had a crawl space, I'd never had much reason to investigate it. I was never able to find the entrance, even after ripping up all the carpeting in the house. Likely hardwood had been installed over the access door, making it an unlikely point of entry for an intruder. "How do I get down to the crawl space?" "Yes, you should give the crawl space a gander." I barely stopped myself from smashing the phone into the counter. "I plan to. Where can I find the entrance?" "That'll be on the floor of the bathroom closet." I looked around the room. Surely I'd misheard him. Either that, or he was confused again. "What?" "I know. It's an odd place for it. But it's only there because that room didn't always used to be a bathroom." "The bathroom doesn't have a closet." "Sure it does. Just to the left of the vanity." I looked at the mirror. At that long, oversized mirror. I'd always found it odd for a bathroom of that size to have a built-in, floor-to-ceiling mirror. What was it that Anders said when he'd first visited? That something had looked different about the bathroom. Setting my phone down next to the sink, I stepped up to the glass. I spent a few moments feeling around the frame, looking for a latch. Then, I grabbed a portion of the right side of the frame in two hands. After one hard yank, the mirror swung open like a door, revealing a large walk-in closet. Anders was saying something on the other end of the line, but I was too stunned to answer. There was a square-shaped hole at the back of the closet, which I assumed led down into the crawl space beneath the house. The closet floor was littered with all kinds of trash. Filthy sheets, fast food containers, beer cans, and I realized some of my own items. Little things I thought I'd misplaced. A sock, a toothbrush, a comb, and a small framed photograph of me, my sister, and our old family dog. I crouched down to pick up the photo, perched in the doorway as I studied my younger, smiling self. I heard Anders saying my name over the phone. Except, the voice didn't sound much like Anders at all. It was too deep, too clear, too close. When I looked up, a man was peeking out at me from the hole in the floor. He smiled at me, his eyes wide and pupils brown. His smile was so wide it looked painful, and his hair long and matted. He was only visible from the neck up, and the harsh lighting made it look like a disembodied head was grinning at me from the back of the closet. Horrified, I rose to my feet and ran. I didn't stop running until I made it to my car, which I promptly drove to my sister's house. The next day, I drove to the police station to file a report. An officer met me at the house to check the scene, and I showed him the hidden closet, which indeed had an entrance to the crawl space. My best guess was that the intruder was entering my crawl space from the small door on the side of my house. He'd likely been squatting in the house during the year in which it sat unoccupied, and when he saw it was being prepared for sale, he disguised the closet door so as to keep a little room for himself. Why he decided to stay, or why he was leaving me messages, I can't say. From his actions, and from what little I saw of him, I think it's safe to assume that he wasn't of sound mind. Unfortunately, the man was never found. For all I know, he's still in that same neighborhood. Hell, he might even be in the same house. I moved across the country afterwards, and have lived in studio apartments ever since. The thought of living in a big house with all those rooms and corners and places to hide gives me the creeps. It's not just houses that the incident soured for me, but mirrors as well. These days, when I visit a friend or stay at a hotel, I always have to carefully inspect the bathroom mirrors, shining a light directly into their faces and tapping a finger against the glass, because the worst detail of the whole ordeal was that, when revisiting the bathroom with the police officer, closed the door and looked into the mirror. Instead of the mirror backing, I saw the officer's face on the other side of the glass. In 1975, my best friend disappeared. I'm going to tell you what happened. It won't take long, because the story is a short one. But that's a necessity of the facts. Quite simply, there aren't many. Here they are. His name was James Wade. He was 13 years old. One night, he went to bed, and the next morning, he wasn't there. The front door was open, and James was gone. The house, as far as anyone could tell, hadn't been broken into, and there were no signs of a disturbance. James wasn't a troubled child, and his parents were decent, loving, and hardworking. They all lived together in a nice middle-class neighborhood in the suburbs. No one ever saw him again. The police had no leads, no clues, and no suspects. The story pretty much starts and ends there. Pretty much. But not quite. James disappeared on Wednesday night. I saw him in school earlier that day, and he told me that the previous night, something had woken him up in the early hours of the morning. Exactly what, he couldn't say. It was late November, and when he'd gone to bed, the wind had been shrieking with a vengeance. But when he woke up, everything was deathly still. Maybe the sudden quiet woke him. Sleep is strange like that. Whatever, when he did wake, he woke with a crawling sense of dread, like he'd just surfaced from a nightmare. And as he lay there, with his heart pounding in his chest and the silence pounding in his ears, he heard something. Faint at first. The low, heavy growl of a big diesel engine. Somewhere close, and getting closer. Then, as it approached his house, he heard a second noise. It took him a moment to realize it was a horn, beeping gently, like someone taking care not to wake the whole street, tapping out a friendly rhythm, a kind of... But it was a horrible noise, James said. Tortured and unnatural, like the honking of a dying goose. He crept to the window and looked outside. Crawling down the empty street at the unhurried pace of an ice cream van was an old school bus. A battered, yellow GMC. One of those things that looks like a cross between a tractor and a horse box. It looked like it had driven through a swamp. There were mud splatters radiating out from rusted wheel arches and dead leaves rotting in the windscreen grill. The windows were streaked with grime. At least one of them was cracked. Some of the body panels had been replaced, and the bodywork was a patchwork of yellow shades, adorned with black lettering that was peeling away, hanging off the sides of the bus like shreds of torn skin. James didn't switch on the bedroom light, and he didn't open the curtains. He just kind of peered through a crack between the drapes. But when he did, the bus rolled to a stop. It stood there for a few moments, idling in the center of the road. Then, its headlights flashed. By now, James's skin was crawling in terror. Seeing an old school bus on a quiet residential back street in the early hours of the morning was a strange sight, but it shouldn't have been one that inspired blind terror. But it did. James could sense that something was very wrong. He dived back into bed and pulled the sheets over his head. He lay there for a while with his heart beating, And sometime later, not long, maybe 5 minutes, he crept back to the window. The bus was outside his house. When he inched the curtains open, the horn went. A friendly beep. A "come on, it's time to go" beep. James went back to bed, and this time he stayed there. The horn honked a few more times. A few minutes later, he heard the bus pull away. On Wednesday morning, when I saw him in school, James had black bags under his bloodshot eyes. He claimed he hadn't slept a wink. He was clearly distressed. I made a mistake, he kept telling me. I shouldn't have looked, he kept saying. It doesn't mean anything, I told him. It's just a bus. But nothing I said seemed to reassure him. I shouldn't have looked, he kept saying. And that's where my story ends. Me and James went our separate ways at the end of the school day, and I never saw him again. That's it. No big reveal. No explanation. No twist. No climax. Nothing. Unfortunately, life is like that. Loose ends and unanswered questions. I'm in my 50s now. Sometimes I get nightmares. Sometimes they're the same, and sometimes they're different. But even when they're different, they're just variations on a theme. Here's one. It's late night. My car has blown a tire. I'm fixing it by the side of the road. I hear an engine. It gets closer and closer, until I'm shielding my eyes from the glare of oncoming headlights. A school bus rolls by. As it passes me, I see a kid in the back window, banging the glass and screaming something that's lost in the roar of the GMC's huge diesel engine. It's James. He hasn't aged a day. I'm not a superstitious man. There's nothing in this story that can't be explained rationally. Maybe the bus had nothing to do with James's disappearance. Hell, maybe there was no bus. Maybe he dreamt the whole thing. Even so, I've got 2 children of my own, and when they were young, I told them an embellished version of this story. A story about an old school bus that cruises the streets at night. It moves slowly, like a stalking cat. Its horn honking gently, a siren song to curious children. And if any children get out of bed, go over to the window and look outside, the bus will roll to a stop. The next time they look out the window, it will be parked outside their house. Soon after that, maybe even the same night, that child will disappear without a trace. I told them that sometimes you can see the bus during the day, but during the day, it can't hurt you. During the day, it just travels from town to town. Sometimes adults see it too, It can't hurt adults. Or maybe it can. It just doesn't want them. Mostly, adults don't even notice it. But even when they do, they certainly don't notice anything strange about it. Because, although you can see through the windows, you can't see inside the bus. You can't see the children banging on the glass, crying and screaming, and wondering why the hell you're just standing there looking at them, and why the hell you don't do something. You can't see the children who gave up hope long ago and now just sit there, staring into space or sobbing into their laps. The children never get old. The bus never stops. My children cried and wouldn't sleep for a week. My wife was livid. I didn't care. I'm not saying that what I told my children is true. It's a bastardized version of what James told me, with gaps filled in by my nightmares. Nevertheless, it seemed important to me that my children know that if they are ever laying in bed, and if they ever hear the sound of an engine and a honking horn, they ignore it. Failing that, they should run out of their rooms and come and climb into bed with me and their mother. Anything. Just don't go to the window. I used to work for a Subway next to a liquor store, along a fairly busy road. I hated the job, but I was only working there on Friday and Saturday evenings to earn some extra money. The customers were friendly enough, referring to me as the blue-eyed girl, as we didn't have name tags. My coworkers were all right as well, being fun and interesting people. But my boss was a jerk. Luckily, I didn't have to see him often because he was only around during the mornings. Yet, he'd always find a way to make my job more stressful. My boss would constantly say that our store was doing poorly in profits, and would make it so that only one person would be working for hours alone. I have no idea what he was talking about, because whenever I was working, I felt as though every resident in our city would make an appearance at some time during my shift. Luckily, I had a coworker with me until about an hour before close, something I was truly grateful for. But that all changed after minimum wage went up. My boss figured he'd save the money he was losing by cutting hours even more. So, instead of working with someone until 8:30 or 9 p.m., I would be alone from 6 p.m. until close. Something that worried my mother and boyfriend. They didn't particularly like the thought of me being alone in the store for that long, as I'm a girl. I didn't like the thought of it either, but what could I do? I dreaded the following weekend when the new schedule would be in effect. On Friday, my boyfriend agreed to stay with me until close. But on Saturday, he couldn't. And so, I begrudgingly made my way to work for 5 p.m. on that day. I worked with someone else until 6 p.m., and then they left. I was now in the store, alone. I was hoping it'd be dead in the store, since a football game was on that night. And this proved to be true. Not many people came in. So with the spare time, I started cleaning things early, as I knew it would take a lot longer to get everything done without anyone else helping me. And I'd bring many empty containers to the back room to wash them, returning to the front whenever I would hear the door alarm go off, signaling that a customer had just walked in. This went on for a couple of hours, and I hated every moment of it. I was in the back around 9 p.m., trying to finish washing some things, when I heard the door alarm go off. We would be closed in just a half hour, so this was the point in my shift where I truly despised getting any customers. I finished rinsing the bowl I was washing, and then reached for a paper towel, walking to the front to greet my unwanted customer. Much to my surprise, no one was there. I didn't see any cars out front, but I looked around the store briefly before returning to the back room. Whoever it was, they must have decided they didn't want anything. Not that I minded. A couple of minutes passed, and then I heard the door alarm go off again. I briskly walked to the front, expecting a customer to be standing there, looking at the menu. But when I got there, I didn't see anyone standing there, ready to order. Instead, I found a man sitting on the far end of the store, at the back table. He appeared dirty, with scraggly hair and mud all over his pants. He tracked some in, I could see, and wasn't too happy about it, knowing I'd have to remop the floors. Despite my irritation, I greeted the man. "Hello, sir. Are you waiting on someone, or wanting a minute to look over the menu?" He kept looking back and forth, from wall to wall, and occasionally out the window. He almost appeared disoriented, but would look at his phone every once in a while, as though he were expecting a message from someone. He was fiddling with something in his pocket, but wouldn't take it out. Most importantly, he didn't respond to my question, and I was getting pretty annoyed. "Well, we'll be closing in 20 minutes, sir. Please keep that in mind." Again, he didn't respond, just kept looking everywhere and anywhere but toward me. With an irritated sigh, I walked to the back room and began preparing the mop bucket, filling it with water and floor cleaner. This probably took about 2 minutes. Once it was ready, I wheeled it towards the front and quickly noticed that the man wasn't there anymore. He couldn't have left the store, however. I would have heard the door alarm go off if it had been opened. I grabbed my mop and looked toward the ground, where I noticed the set of muddy footprints leading towards the bathroom door. Great. I'll have to mop the bathroom again, too. I began mopping the trail leading towards the table where the man had sat, and then all the way toward the bathroom door. As I finished cleaning the floor, directly in front of the door, I heard the faint, muffled cries of someone on the other side. I leaned in until my ear was almost against the door itself and listened silently. I could hear quiet sobs mixed with some words like, "No," and "I can't." What on earth was going on in there? I took a step back as quietly as I could, and then, was surprised by the sound of the door being unlocked. I immediately jumped away with mop in hand, and was a good 10 feet away when the door opened. The man emerged, and stood there for a couple of moments when he saw me standing there. Then, for the first time, he looked me straight in the eye. This sent a chill down my spine. I held onto the mop nervously, almost defensively. His stare was blank, and yet somehow sorrowful. He didn't say anything, and quickly walked out the front entrance, setting off the door alarm. I turned, and saw him make his way down the road, never looking back. I took a breath, loosening my grip on the mop, and looked back towards the bathroom door. I reached for the handle, and slowly opened the door, quickly peering around inside before actually entering. When I walked inside, I found a giant muddy mess all over the floor, as though the man had been walking in circles in there. I sighed and quickly mopped up the filth and turned to leave, when I noticed the garbage can lid was on the ground beside it. I reached for it, bending over the can itself in order to retrieve it, when I happened to notice something shining inside. I could feel my face grow pale when I reached in and retrieved an open switchblade. The only other thing in the can was a crumpled piece of paper. I reached for it and slowly opened it. The words on it still haunt me to this day. 435 Wilson Road, brunette, blue eyes, Saturday 9 p.m., $1,200. I closed the store early that night. I didn't finish washing the dishes and didn't bother sweeping or mopping the back room. I just locked the door, put the food away, counted my drawer, and left. I quit the next day. I told my mom about what had happened, and she called the police. I gave them my description of the guy, as well as the knife and note I had found. They thanked me for my information and told us they'd do what they could to find the guy. My mom still freaks out about it and won't let me get another job. I don't go out as often, and I feel nervous every day. I always feel as though I'm being watched or hunted. I still wonder about that note sometimes. But in all honesty, I don't want to know. Whoever wrote it, whoever wanted to hurt me, I don't want to know. I may never know anyway. But one thing I do know is that I'll never work a closing shift again. I started narrating stories on YouTube because after sending every story I wrote to all the big names and a few lesser-known names, I got no response. No thanks for sending. No, your story sucks. Nothing. I won't mention who they are, but most of you should know who I'm talking about. Although, one big name did read a short story I wrote, which I'm very thankful for. It wasn't my best. This went on for a while, After months of frustration, I finally realized it wasn't going to happen. So, I decided to narrate my own stories, create a YouTube channel, pick a name, and post them myself. How hard could it be? So, I did. My stories were good. At least, I thought so. To my surprise, a few people actually liked them, and after a while, asked if I would narrate their stories. I thought, wow, really? Okay. They would send them to me via email, which I gave them, and I would narrate their stories. And that started the ball rolling. I was talking to a coworker one day about narrating stories for fun, and they suggested I check out an app called Reddit and search short, scary stories and nosleep. They said they posted a few stories on there and thought it would be perfect for me. So I did. I created an account and started my search. There, I found all kinds of amazing stories. I contacted some authors through comments and personal messages, asking permission to read their stories. Most were cool with it, although I did get a few rejections. I just kept on asking. Always ask permission. Things were going great. I was narrating amazing stories. People were liking them. I even earned enough karma on Reddit to start my own community. I decided to use it for people to send stories to, and people actually did. All the while, I still searched other communities for stories to read. That was until I found that story. I should have known by their username that it wasn't a good idea. I'm not gonna mention the name of it, because it still sends chills up my spine just thinking about it. I'm shaking as I read this. It was about 1 a.m. Insomnia set in, and I was sitting at my dining room table searching Reddit when I found that story, and it just blew me away. It had it all. Drama, suspense, emotion, everything. I contacted the author through personal message, asking permission. Except for some reason, I signed it using my real name, not my stage name. Big mistake. I realized what I did, but it was too late. I already sent it. Anyway, mere seconds went by, and I received a reply. Yes, I've been waiting for this. Thinking they've been waiting for someone to read one of their stories, just like I was, I replied, "Thank you," and planned to go on with my night. Until I received my own personal message from the author. "Hi, my name's Susan. Wanna talk?" I figured, what the hell? I'm not doing anything else. What could it hurt? So, I sent back, "Sure." After about a 30-minute conversation, I found out the author was female. We both like Stephen King. We both love horror stories. We both live in the US, only a few states away from each other. I started getting tired. I let her know. We ended the conversation both saying goodnight. I was laying in bed, almost asleep, when I got a message from her saying, "I'm glad to have someone like you to talk to. I miss that." I shrugged it off and went to sleep. A couple of days went by. I came home from work. and found a note on my door. It said, "Hi, sorry I missed you. Love, Susan." What the hell? Love? I only talked to her for like a half hour. How'd she get my address? What the shit did I get myself into? I took the note off the door and quickly went inside, locking the door and calling the police. I told them this story. They said there was nothing they could do until an actual crime was committed. Yeah, that's reassuring. I hung up on them and tried to do my normal routine. Make coffee, get changed, drink coffee, and so on. I couldn't get the note out of my head. The doorbell rang. I froze and slowly walked to the window to see who it was. It was a woman. She was about 5.5 feet tall. Tattered, dirty clothes. Long, stringy brown hair. It looked like she hadn't bathed in a month. I knew it was Susan. I had to end this. Now. Before it turned ugly. And ugly it turned. I opened the door and said, "Look, Susan, I don't know what you think is going on, but I just wanted to read your story. That's it. I'm sorry if you thought there was something more, but there's not. Please, go home." I shut the door and walked back into the house. She screamed like a wild woman. She started pounding on the door and screaming, "I love you, I love you." I ran to my phone to call 911. A rock or brick or something came crashing through the front window. I turned and saw this crazy woman climbing into my house, screaming, "Read my story, read my story." The shards of glass from the broken window cutting her as she climbed in. Blood on the window and the floor.
911, what is your emergency?
Crazy woman is in... She charged, slamming into me, knocking me over the desk and falling to the floor herself. She was kicking and screaming like a lunatic. I got up, phone still in hand, and smashed it hard against her temple as she was getting up. I don't hit women, but that bitch deserved it. Her eyes rolled back in her head. The screaming stopped, and she fell to the floor, unconscious. I heard sirens outside. I guess the 911 operator heard it all. The cops came, took my statement. They made me stay outside while the paramedics tended to Susan, if that's even her real name. The cops put her in cuffs, and the paramedics took her to the ambulance. On her way out, she looked at me and laughingly said, "I'll be waiting." They put her inside, then left. The cops finished up and did the same. I was left with a messed up door, a broken window, blood all over the place, a broken desk and a broken phone. All over a goddamn story. I'm done. I moved out that night. I left all my stuff behind. Slept in the car till payday, then rented a room off a coworker. And I never narrated another story ever again. So, if any of my subscribers are listening to this, and wondered whatever happened to me, now you know. Why I stopped narrating stories on YouTube. It was one of those times when you start awake suddenly with the feeling of being watched. You know, you might be in an uncomfortable position. The covers may have slipped to the side, leaving part of your back exposed. But you refrain from shifting your position so as to not provoke your dark, intangible observer. For several minutes, your hairs may prickle. You may take to breathing in quick, shallow puffs. And you keep your eyes squeezed safely shut, for fear that they may seek a grotesque figure in the shadows. However, this time, it didn't go away after a few minutes. I had dreamt of sinking rapidly in a river, faster than natural, faster than falling even. The water seared past my face and eyes, and I frantically twisted and strained my wrists against the knotted rope that bound them. The light above was tinted a deep green and faded far too fast, a grim omen of despair. I closed my eyes and tried to scream, my mouth filled with water. It tasted like blood. As the river tore at my skin and burned my lungs, I opened my eyes to a grinning skull, not 4 inches away, and shuddered to consciousness. My left arm was bent awkwardly under my stomach and beginning to fall asleep. My right foot stuck slightly out from under the protection of my blanket, but my primal instincts led me to freeze and listen and wait. The dream had made me uneasy, perhaps, but I have never been an overly nervous person. Sure, after watching a creepy movie, I'll check the shadows and turn on the lights and shut the curtains for fear of being met with another set of eyes upon looking out. But these notions passed, and I recovered, and I breathed easily. There is another degree of fear that is not so easily shaken. That which forewarns imminent and real danger. Young deer and similar animals will naturally tense up in the presence of a predator, hoping to rely on the camouflage of a shrub or bush to compensate for what they lack in physical vigor. As soon as they detect a nearby threat, they freeze and remain rigid, hoping desperately for the danger to overlook them and press onwards. The eerie thing is, however, that they will do this even when they don't perceive the threat. Young gazelle will exhibit this behavior even when a lion is behind a one-way mirror, with no way to be seen, or heard, or smelt. They can tell when they are being watched, even when no biological means of sensing it is present. They just know. They just fear. And I felt as though I was being watched that night. As much as I willed myself to shift, to adjust, I could not bring myself to do so. My skin crawled with anticipation. My ears perked to alertness. My heart raced in my chest. I thought about the skull in my dream. Dared I risk open my eyes? What if the apparition were to be there, hovering over my bed, waiting for that moment? I took a deep breath and slowly forced my eyes open. There was no skull floating before my eyes, although I could not see much of anything. Across the room, on my desk, my alarm clock flashed 2:13 in blocky red digits. The rest of the room remained submerged in darkness. I shut my eyes in relief. A creak. Was I sure I heard it? It came from the floor just outside my closet. I held my breath, but the sound did not come again. My house wasn't old, but it did settle like any large wooden structure. I exhaled. My arm was still awkwardly bent under me. I tensed my muscles nervously. I still felt so much like an infant gazelle, frozen in a bush to avoid the lion behind the glass. Except, I knew that I had no such protection. The floorboard creaked again. Bolder. This time, I was less willing to blame it on the settling of a house. It was too heavy, too deliberate. My heart fluttered. My eyes raced behind closed lids. It was at this point that I first thought that it was more than misguided instinct that left me so alert. I opened my eyes. The room was still dark. The alarm clock flashed 2:21 in blocky red digits. My eyes searched the shadows near where I knew my closet was located. They found only darkness. For all I knew, there could be someone standing there with a knife or a gun. But I had no means of perception. I shut my eyes and shuddered. The third time, I was certain that I had heard a person. For not only did I hear a creak, but a footfall. My eyes shot open. I broke my bounds of motionless and jolted upright. My heart frantically beat the inside of my ribcage, and my breath caught in the back of my throat. I looked across the room. All I saw was darkness. I could not see the clock. There was something between me and the clock. I half gasped and tried to scream, but it stuck in my throat like a hiccup, or like in a dream. I convulsed, threw my bedsheets aside, scrambled backwards on my hands, tried to back away, when a dark figure lunged forward from the sea of darkness.
And his name is John C.
Trumpets blared. The floodlights switched on, and before I knew it, I was being pummeled by a 251-pound ex-military pro wrestler. He threw a right hook. It landed true. My face cried, but my heart knew only raw delight. He lifted me above his head and threw me onto the ground at full force. The trumpets blared. I smiled as I bled. John Cena stood above me with a confident smile.
我很喜欢冰淇淋，但是速度与激情中，冰淇淋，速度与激情，速度与激情中，我。
He said, with his rich, deep John Cena voice. Of course, I thought. He punted me from the ring. I laughed. Thank you, John Cena. I've always been a creature of habit, and few observations ever elude my mind. That's why I can recall any event, down to the smallest insignificant detail. But recently, my memories haven't matched up with reality. On any given weekday, I'll return from work. My keys will be in my left inner coat pocket. I'll open the door, retrieve the mail from the assortment of mailboxes on the left side of the entrance. My apartment number is 7, just like the mailbox. Following this, I'll travel up the stairs to the first floor. 11 steps. I always start with my left and end with my left. At least, I thought so. Because a few days ago, I tripped. Not because I'm clumsy, but because on that day, I ended the staircase with my right foot. Of course, I doubted myself, but it was enough to recheck the amount of steps in the staircase. And sure enough, one was missing. At this point, I could have talked to my neighbors, but they weren't the detail-oriented kind. So, I let it slide. It was a minor change, one I quickly adapted to. At least, until I lost my wristwatch. The prior night, I put it on my nightstand, and the following morning, it was simply gone. It wasn't impossible that I misplaced it, but I had a firm memory of placing it on the nightstand. Everything escalated today. I woke up, took a shower, shaved, brushed my teeth, cut my nails on all 9 fingers. 9 fingers. One of them had disappeared, with no trace, just healthy skin covering the barren knuckle. Not knowing who to call, I turned to my mother, my voice trembling as I explained what had happened. She went quiet for a few seconds, before responding with worry in her words. She told me I was born with only 9 fingers. I hung up. It was dark. I sat down, trying to remember. Had I simply forgotten? Was there something wrong with my mind? Only after minutes did I realize I was sitting in the dark, but it was daytime. My apartment didn't have any windows anymore. Panic set in. This wasn't in my head. They don't even make windowless apartments. I tried to escape, but there was no door to flee through. I was trapped in a nicely decorated brick box that was my apartment. I called the police. They claimed my address didn't exist. After they hung up, I would have called someone else if my telephone wasn't already gone. My computer is all that exists, and I'm trying to write this story with the stumps that were once my hands. only one middle finger left. A perfect screw you to myself. I'll have to post while my computer still exists. But think about this. Have you lost anything recently? Such as your favorite mug, maybe a blue pen. Something that just disappeared without a trace? That's how it started for me, too. I need help. No matter how many times I think it over. No matter how many times I check the date. No matter how many times I look at the pictures. No matter how much I look at the stains on the concrete. No matter how much I tell myself it was a dream. I know for a fact it was real. I died. And now I'm back. Yesterday was normal, if not a little better than normal, since I went out to eat ice cream with friends. I woke up, ate breakfast, finished my deliveries, and then headed back home. A normal day, until I opened the door of my apartment to find a person robbing my place. I still don't know how they got in. The door was locked, and so were the windows. I'm also on the 3rd floor, and there are bars over the windows. Unfortunately, that doesn't change the fact that they got in and stabbed me. I didn't know they had a knife. I was just trying to protect what little I had. I know now it would have been better to call the police, but I didn't. I attacked him, and in return, I was stabbed in the gut and bled out on my apartment floor alone. I still remember my last words clearly. I hope Mom comes to my funeral. Honestly, now that I have time to think it over, I feel like I could have said something more important. I guess in the moment, I just wanted to see Mom again. I woke up 6 hours later, in my bed, in a completely different set of clothes, with my wound fully healed. At first, I thought I might have been dreaming. It was the most logical explanation, especially since I woke up in my bed. That was, until I saw the very obvious red stain on the floor, in the exact spot I died in. I had no idea what to do. I stood there in the hallway staring down at the evidence of my very own murder. Now, both the victim and witness to a crime that had now been reversed. I covered the red stain with a mat and cried for a while. Then considered my options. I could call the police, but I had no reasonable explanation. I could tell people, but they wouldn't believe me, or worse, they would lock me up. I could look for answers, but there was nothing to go off of, other than the robber, the knife, and how I woke up. The only thing I could think to do was continue on with my life as normal. It felt surreal. Eating breakfast, walking to work, delivering packages, and then going back home that day. I couldn't help myself but question if anyone noticed something different about me. Yet nobody said a word. Nobody glared at me or flinched, or even gave me more than the usual hello. Honestly, At the end of the day, I found myself asking if my death meant anything at all. Although after getting slightly frustrated at the lack of attention, I realized that if I had changed, then people would ask too many questions, and I didn't want that either. So I just went through the day feeling confused and annoyed by my current situation. After work, I decided to take a detour and walk through a nearby park. It's really small, but being alone in an open space allowed me to think a bit. The few questions which I am still asking are, why was I revived? Did the robber revive me? Or did something else do it? Is this temporary? Can I die again? Or was it just that one time? I know I can answer that last one easily. But even after what happened, I still fear death. I'm not going to end my second chance for curiosity's sake. Even though my life is dull, I enjoy it. I am grateful to be alive. Just slightly worried about what will happen next. The time I spent at the park greatly lifted my burdens, and I headed home feeling much more gratitude than I had been. In fact, I walked home feeling kind of like a children's cartoon character that had just learned their lesson. Even as I'm writing this, I feel that way. Because what other purpose did that nightmare serve? I highly doubt that I am supposed to become some kind of superhero now. I'll still look for other reasons and clues to what this all could mean, and if someone is behind this. But for now, I am just going to continue living my life as normal. I just saw something. There is someone outside my window. I called the police and am in my closet now. I went through the hallway opposing that window, so they couldn't see where I hid. It's been 30 minutes, and the police haven't arrived yet. I don't think that figure was the robber. They looked too short. I have no idea how they got to that window. I don't want to die again. It's been an hour and I still don't hear sirens. My phone is at 57% as of me writing this. I called again, but all they said is they were on their way. I'll continue writing until something happens. If I hear someone enter my apartment, I'll publish this. It's been 3 hours. It's nearly 12:40 a.m. at this point. Where are the police? Why are they knocking on the window? If no one comes in the next 10 minutes, I'll just post this and run. It's behind me. I can see its eyes in the reflection. I don't know what to do. Oh God, help me, please. Please, someone help. I'm too afraid to move. I'm not going to type. It'll hear. I woke up again. I was killed by whatever was in there with me. I'm currently in a donut shop 2 blocks away from my house. I got out of there as soon as I realized what had happened. I called the police, but they hung up on me when I did. I've tried so many people's phones, but none of them work. I'm too scared to even tell anyone now. What if it silences them too? I have no idea what it can do, but I don't want to test it. One of my questions was answered last night, though. I can die multiple times. Each time feels like sleeping. It's not darkness, just fuzziness for an instant, and then I wake up again. I don't know what that thing was, but it was horrifying. I can't describe much of it, other than eyes. It blended in with the wall, but was just slightly off, that I could see its eyes in my phone screen's reflection. I think it's reviving me, but for what purpose I have no clue. I just know that whatever it is wants to kill me. I went to work, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I think I'll stay in a hotel tonight, and then maybe go back to my apartment tomorrow. I'll go back with someone though, just in case it's still there. Then they can call the police for me, or if not that, at least I'll have someone else who I can talk to about all this, other than whoever reads this after I post it. After I arrived at my hotel room, I called a work friend over, explaining I was at a hotel due to someone stalking me. It was a simple but believable lie. He asked if I had contacted the police about it, and I told him I had, and they didn't do anything about it. That struck up a nice conversation about how law enforcement just isn't reliable for crimes like these without evidence. It got my mind off things, even though I felt kind of awful for bad-mouthing the police, when they really couldn't do anything to help. It's almost 11:30 p.m. as I'm writing this, and I feel good about my plan. My work friend is going to leave in a few minutes, but there has been no sign of it. It's here. My work friend is currently in the bathroom, and I can see it out the window again. It isn't up close like it was before. It's in the parking lot below instead, looking up at me. It also doesn't look human like it had when it was in the window last night. I'm not taking my eyes off of it until he gets out of the bathroom. It only appeared after he left, so if he comes back, maybe, it might leave me alone. I can type more after he comes out of the bathroom, but the line is about to drop out of my peripheral vision. He sees it too. I'm not crazy. He sees it. He tried to call the police, but the same thing happened. I explained a little, and he got pretty pissed that I didn't tell him, but agreed he probably wouldn't have believed me. We're taking shifts watching the thing. It hasn't moved for a half an hour. I can feel it touching me. It feels like pins and needles wherever it does. Then, after it pulls away, it itches for a while like a bug bite. I hate this. We don't know how it got in. I think I'm going to die again. I'm not worried about me dying, though. I know I'll come back. I'm more worried about Mac. I don't want him to die because of this being I now seem to be carrying around with me. He's watching me type from his hiding spot under the bed. He can probably see what it fully looks like. If you're reading this after I've died, Mac, I'll be okay. I promise. This has happened 2 times already. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. Please stay away from me after you get out of this. I don't want anyone else to die. I can't drop the phone. My hands feel like they're asleep. Why haven't you killed me yet? Can I speak? Please don't. Where did you come from? Why are you bringing me back? Is it permanent? What is it? Why? Will you kill us after I do it? Please. Why me? So it was random? Then why was I chosen? The plea for help I began with seems almost foolish now. I started confused and ended writing this feeling almost like I'd found the answer to all of my questions. It spoke to me, and I wrote back to it. Mac is still hiding. In fact, it's still watching me type this. It always was, because this is exactly what it wanted. I can see its form move in the static of black shadows of the room and windows. Before, I wrote it off as my mind playing tricks on me. Like when I thought there was something in the blackness of my bedroom or down the hall. I'll wake up tomorrow, but today I'm going to die. I'm going to die and wake up every day for the rest of my life. Until the end of time. I asked how to stop it, because I know eventually I'll cave. It answered me, but don't worry. It said they'll wake up. When I was younger, I lived with my father and his mother. I was the only child, a girl at that, and my father was very protective of me. My grandmother, on the other hand, hated me. At first, she would just yell at me and shove me around when Dad was at work. It escalated quickly after he started working longer hours to make ends meet. I rarely saw my father at that point. For 4 years, she did things I can't even bring myself to really think about. Not enough to write it. For those 4 years, I prayed and prayed for release. I prayed and wished for her to die. To God. To whoever would listen. My dad probably would have believed me if I'd had a chance to talk to him. But she'd made me feel as though I were an abomination over the years. To the point that I couldn't bear it anymore. After she killed my kitten and made me bury it, at the age of 13, I attempted to end it all inside my closet. Apparently, I didn't know what the heck I was doing, and the bar in the closet that I tied myself to fell on my head and knocked me the hell out. I pulled myself up and headed to sneak into the bathroom, without my monster of a grandmother catching me and giving me another beating. As I left my bedroom, I caught a whiff of something disgustingly rancid. Like vomit, burning flesh, and blood mixed together, warm. I knew all these smells fairly well, considering what my grandmother did to me. And I thought for a moment it might have been my imagination. Or her, making something disgusting for me to eat, to torture me more. Well, I recognized the separate smells in a way. I'd never smelled something like this. As I got closer and closer to the stairs, overlooking the living room, which was right across from the bathroom, I started to hear something, faintly. I remember hearing it a few feet back, but suddenly, it seemed so much louder. My head was pounding, my heart was pounding, and all I could hear was the mere idea of peeking over the stairs and into the living room was suddenly so profoundly frightening that I almost just went back into my bedroom. But, strangely enough, it was amazingly easy to just do it anyway. What I saw in the living room will never leave me for as long as I live, in more than one sense. My grandmother was lying on the ground. There was someone wearing black kneeling over her. They were both covered in blood. The person's head was moving rhythmically over its hands, which held what I then realized was some organ in her body. The person didn't look up, and I was scared silent. There was so much blood. So much blood. The sound of gnawing, the smacking mouth, the snapping of her organs as they were ripped from my grandmother's body. What was left of it? The brutally grotesque sight of her chest cavity having been torn open, of her body being consumed little by little, filled me with terror I had never known before. I didn't know what to do. It ate her body, slowly, seeming to enjoy every bite it took. Its body swaying and moving so unnaturally that I couldn't even think it was human. I couldn't stop watching. I couldn't run away. The sheer terror of it choked the scream I would have let out. It stopped. I stopped. It looked up at me after what seemed like an eternity, releasing the contents of its mouth. Gory pieces and blood, some brown at that point, covered most of its face. What I could see of the face, it seemed to be male, very pale in patches. Where eyes were supposed to be were black pits. Pits that seemed to dilate, expand and retract. He had no lips, but his mouth twitched, like some kind of hologram going in and out, slowly smiling. The smile expanding beyond normal human ability. I vomited and passed out. I woke up. My father was home, and worrying over me. My grandmother's body was gone, along with all the blood. Where's Grandma? Where is she? I kept asking him, until I had to stop from the look in his eyes. He told me her heart was bad, and she was in heaven now. I couldn't believe it. That was impossible, right? Did I imagine that whole thing? At her funeral, on the way to her burial site, I saw the man again. He looked more human, but I knew it was him. I remembered that smile. That day, I smiled back. I still have dreams about that man. Sometimes I think I see him in public. Even when I don't see him, I can feel him there. He's always there, watching me. Far beyond the reaches of our Earth, amongst the eternal ether of the cosmos, lasts beings of true power and magnitude, who lay beyond the comprehension of our minds, beings that shape and warp the fabric of space and distort the reality in which we live. To gaze upon their eyes is to gaze upon the eyes of infinity. To describe their figure is to describe the universe. To witness their power is to witness the power of the cosmos. I was but only a young man when I was first stricken with the devilish fever that had previously claimed my family. I was to be considered lucky, as the great plague of bloodletting did not bring about my end. It was only the insanity and fear of the cosmos that came with it that ailed me. And that insanity ails me to this very day. To my kin, the true fever and pain of the plague would be their end. My mother was the first to go. She had ruined her wrists in a fit of hysterical madness, while my sister and I were away at school. It was my father who found her, falling to her body in a futile struggle that some divine interaction would bring them back together. As it turned out, that divine interaction would simply be the contact of my mother's tainted blood. On the night that my father expired, the swelling of blood to his brain caused what I had first believed to be delusions, visions of great cosmic and ethereal horrors. Fearing their awesome power over the mind of man, he took to the blade, ending his life face down in a pool of plagued blood. My sister was awoken by his fit of insanity and treaded barefoot into his room. But before the light of the candle could illuminate the void of the room, her feet felt the blood, and she knew. I was the only one who could care for my sister, as we had no other family. Having turned 14th the month prior, my sister was a small, frail child who could be frightened merely by the sight of her own shadow. She did not last as long as mother or father, who fought the plague for nearly a week. My sister hardly lasted beyond the third day, and a part of me wishes I never witnessed the fourth. I shall refrain from describing how my sister passed, as the brutality and gore of the event left me in such fragile mind that I was admitted to the Providence Asylum of the insane. It was here that I first began to experience the true nature of the universe and its unforgiving forces. As I mentioned, I was stricken with fits of madness and insanity, but not by the plague. If such were the case, I believe this manuscript would not be here to unleash the knowledge of horrors that it holds. It was during the first month of my admittance into the hospital that I met an artist by the name of Joseph B. Wilcox. I never learned the reason that Joseph, too, was admitted to the hospital, only that he felt the need to be there to protect someone, be it himself or family. He was a tall, skinny fellow, a neatly cut head of brown hair, and a pair of delicate blue eyes. His hands were soft and slender, like that of a woman's, a clear sign that he preferred the intellectual arts of painting and clay sculpting over the more physical and manual labors of other young men of his age. We became quick friends, realizing that we were the more stable bunch within the hospital. Joseph would tell stories of life in the small village outside of Providence, whose name escapes my thought, and would often gift me with small sketches to decorate the drab and numbing room in which I stayed. I would tell stories of working in the family shop, behind the counter to help reach the jars of sweets that neither my mother or sister could reach, or of the kind old woman who would often come to purchase candles and soaps, and how she would always find my youthful exuberance a charming quality I should not let go of so easily. 'Twas the night of March 8th, when Joseph entered my room, his footsteps slow and monotonous as he crept to my bedside. I did not hear him enter. I only felt as he laid one of his feminine hands on my arm and shook me. When I awoke to see him standing over me, I shot up, frightened by the scared and blood-stained face that stood before me. In his madness, Joseph had crafted a shiv from his bed frame and carved strange sigils along his face and arms. His eyes were bloodshot, and his mouth curled into a sinister smile. He placed a shiv on my lap and laid his hands on my shoulder, whispering some sort of terrible mantra into my ear. His hand drifted to the shiv, and he beckoned me to join him in a paradise lost a millennium ago. Blood drained from my face, and I felt my arms grow cold as I witnessed a wretched abyss manifest beyond him, and what seemed like that which is beyond the normal world. A rush of hatred and anger overtook me as I plunged the shiv into his gut. The gargled and raspy voice of my once friend slowly faded as he fell limp on the molded and rotting floor. Fear overtook as I was too terrified to remove my eyes off the body before me. When I finally broke the trance and looked up, the asylum of which I was confined had warped and twisted into a vista of blackened skies and gray earth below me. Above the vast purgatory that I stood, floated a being that still haunts me in my thoughts and memories of it, and maddens me in my dreams of it. Swirling, churning, gurgling, and writhing like a mass of blackened earthworms in a rotting corpse, was the demon Sultan, who so repugnantly controlled the skies and cosmos as one. I was amongst a land of predators, and I was not worthy enough to even be thought of as prey. I felt as the frail mind of mine shattered, my eyes rotting from the sight of such an eldritch terror that no man should ever know. The wardens found Joseph's body and the shiv under my cot, and there was no fighting what was already apparent. The horrors I witnessed remain with me in life, and when my body shall soon convulse in the noose placed around my wretched throat by the hangman, so too shall the horrors assault me in death. For earth is not our home. Our earth is merely an asylum of the fragile-minded, who are too weak to gaze upon the terror and power of the universe. We made a mistake. That is the simple, undeniable truth of the matter, however painful it might be. The flaw was not in our observatories, for those machines were as perfect as we could make, and they showed us only the unfiltered light of truth. The flaw was not in the predictor, for it is a device of pure, infallible logic, turning raw data into meaningful information without the taint of emotion or bias. No, the flaw was within us, the orchestrators of this disaster, the sentients who thought themselves beyond such failings. We are responsible. It began a short while ago, as these things are measured, less than 6 to the 6th deely ago. Though I suspect our systems of measure will mean very little by the time anyone receives this transmission, we detected faint radio signals from a blossoming intelligence, 2 to the 14th deelies outwards from the galactic core, as photons travel. At first, crude and unstructured, these leaking broadcasts quickly grew in complexity and strength, as did the messages they carried. Through our observatories, we watched a world of strife and violence, populated by a barbaric race of short-lived, fast-breeding vermin. They were brutal and uncultured things, which stabbed and shot and burned each other, with no regard for life or purpose. Even their concepts of art spoke of conflict and pain. They divided themselves according to some bizarre cultural patterns, and set their every industry to cause of death. They terrified us, but we were older and wiser, and so very far away, so we did not fret. Then we watched them split the atom and breach the heavens within the breadth of one of their single, short generations, and we began to worry. When they began actively transmitting messages and greetings into space, we felt fear and horror. Their transmissions promised peace and camaraderie to any who were listening, but we had watched them for far too long to buy into such transparent deceptions. They knew we were out here, and they were coming for us. The orchestrators consulted the predictor, and the output was dire. They would multiply and grow and flood out of their home system like some uncountable tide of devourer worms, consuming all that lay in their path. It might take 6 to the 8 deelies, but they would destroy us if left unchecked. With aching carapaces, we decided to act and sealed our fate. The gift of mercy was 8 to the 4th strides long, with a mouth half that in diameter, filled with many 4 to the 4th weights of machinery, fuel, and ballast. It would push itself up to 1/4 the speed of light with its onboard fuel, and then begin to consume interstellar primary element 2x2 to feed its unlimited acceleration. It would be traveling at nearly light speed when it hit. They would never see it coming. Its launch was a day of mourning, celebration, and reflection. The horror of the act we had committed weighed heavily upon all of us. The necessity of our crime did little to comfort us. The gift had barely cleared the outer cometary halo when the mistake was realized. But it was too late. The gift could not be caught, could not be recalled or diverted from its path. The architects and work crews, horrified at the awful power of the thing upon which they labored, had quietly self-terminated in droves, walking unshielded into radiation zones, neglecting proper null pressure safety, or simply ceasing their nutrient consumption until their metabolic functions stopped. The appalling cost in lives had forced the orchestrators to streamline the gift's design and construction. There had been no time for the design or implementation of anything beyond the simple, massive engines and the stabilizing systems. We could only watch in shame and horror as the light of genocide faded into infrared against the distant void. They grew, and they changed. In a handful of lifetimes, they abolished war, abandoned their violent tendencies, and turned themselves to the grand purposes of life and art. We watched them remake first themselves, and then their world. Their frail, soft bodies gave way to gleaming metals and plastics. They unified their people through an omnipresent communications grid, and produced art of such power and emotion, the likes of which the galaxy has never seen before, or again, because of us. They converted their homeworld into a paradise, by their standards, and many 10 to the 6th of them poured out into the surrounding systems with a rapidity and vigor that we could only envy. With bodies built to survive every environment, from the daylight surface of their innermost world to the atmosphere of their largest gas giants and the cold void in between, they set out to sculpt their system into something beautiful. At first, we thought them simple miners, stripping the rocky planets and moons for vital resources. But then, we began to see the purpose of their constructions, the artwork carved into every surface, and traced across the system in glittering lights and dancing fusion trails. And still, our terrible gift approached. They had less than 2 to the second dealy to see it, following so closely on the trail of its own light. In that time, oh so brief, even by their fleeting lives, more than 10 to the 10th sentience, prepared for death. Lovers exchanged last words, separated by worlds and the tyranny of light speed. Their planet-side engineers worked frantically to build sufficient transmission infrastructure to upload the countless masses with the necessary neural modifications, while those above dumped lifetimes of music and literature from their databanks to make room for passengers. Those lacking the required hardware or the time to acquire it consigned themselves to death, lashed out in fear and pain, or simply went about their lives as best they could under the circumstances. The gift arrived suddenly, the light of its impact visible in our skies, shining bright and cruel, even to the unaugmented ocular receptor. We watched and we wept for our victims, dead so many dealies before the light of their doom had even reached us. Many 6 to the 4ths of those who had been directly or even tangentially involved in the creation of the gift sealed their spiracles with paste as a final penance for their small roles they had played in this atrocity. The light dimmed, the dust cleared, and our observatories refocused upon the place where their shining blue world had once hung in the void, and found only dust and the pale gleam of an orphaned moon, wrapped in a thin, burning wisp of the atmosphere that had once belonged to its parent. Radiation and relativistic shrapnel had wiped out much of the inner system, and continent-sized chunks of molten rock carried screaming ghosts outward at interstellar escape velocities, damned to wander the great void for an eternity. The damage was apocalyptic, but not complete. From the shadows of the outer worlds, tiny points of light emerged. Thousands of fusion trails of single ships and world ships and everything in between. Many 10 to the 6th of survivors in flesh and steel and memory banks, ready to rebuild. For a few moments, we felt relief, even joy, and we were filled with the hope that their culture and art would survive the terrible blow we had dealt them. Then came the message, tightly focused at our star, transmitted simultaneously by hundreds of their ships.
We know you're out there, and we are coming for you.